Okay, so again, I just want to say thank you so much to Mr. Joseph Hill for joining us this evening, and thank you to everyone who is on the Zoom with us. First, I'll read Mr. Hill's biography, and then from there, the floor is his. Mr. Joseph Hill is a veteran journalist and founder of Pothos. I hope I said that right.
Pothos.
Pothos Productions LLC. During more than 30 years, he's worked in a variety of media, including television, radio, newspapers, and magazines. He primarily worked as a television news reporter / producer for 22 years in Nebraska, Wyoming, Kansas, and New York. During his tenure in television news, he covered every type of story from crime and courts to 3 papal visits to the US and Canada and the aftermath of the 9/11 attack. He was one of the original staff for R News, a Time Warner affiliated 24-hour local news station in Rochester, New York. Taking advantage of the extended news format, he produced specials and documentaries when time permitted. His documentaries include Mission of Hope, Rochester in Haiti, shot in Haiti, focusing on the aid work conducted by Rochester Church there. Mission of Hope won the Cable Ace Award in 1994. Remembering Malcolm X in Rochester, a look at part of the last week and the slain civil rights leader's life, which was spent in Rochester. It was a Peabody Award nominee and received an NABJ award. 4 days in Denver followed several hundred young Rochester Catholics who traveled to Denver for the 1993 World Youth Day celebration with Pope John Paul II. More recently, he researched, wrote, produced, and narrated Black Border Warriors, the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, about the Black Seminoles' epic saga from Florida to Oklahoma, then to Mexico, and eventually settling in Texas. In 1870 at Fort Clark, Texas, they became the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, an elite commando unit for the US military during the Indian Wars. They received 4 Medal of Honor honors in an 8-year period while never losing a man in combat. Black Border Warriors premiered at the 2018 Black International Cinema Berlin Film Festival in Germany and was awarded Best Feature-Length Documentary. In May 2019, it was screened at the Pan-African Film Festival in Cannes, France, and was awarded Semi-Finalist at the Cannes World Cinema Film Festival, Independent Films, in May 2021, also at Cannes, France. He began shooting his latest documentary, The Fight for Freedom: Black Soldiers in the Civil War, at historic Fort Negley in Nashville, Tennessee, in June of 2019. It's the story of the USCT, United States Colored Troops, Black Union soldiers in the Civil War. He's originally from Chicago, educated at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. He lives in St. Paul, Minnesota, near his 2 adult children, their spouses, and his 4 grandchildren. So again, thank you, Mr. Hill, and take it away.
Thank you, Wendy. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Thanks for showing Black Border Warriors again, which I appreciate. And hopefully there'll be a new audience or people who've seen it before who can pick up something new, something that inspires them. Before we started on the air, Wendy, I told you I've got a couple of books, and I'm going to send my little bibliography of books about the Black Seminole. You know, one of the things I want to say as a lover of history and as an African American, I've told people this before, I'm jealous of the Black Seminole because you all have something that most Black people in this country don't have. You have a strong historical connection going through centuries, which because of slavery, you know, I'll never know who my ancestors were. There's just no way there aren't that many Alex Haleys around who can trace their lineage back to the village in Africa. So I'm jealous of you all, but I'm saying that I'm jealous in a loving way because I hope you take advantage of the rich history that you have. You all are some of the most unique people in the United States, and take advantage of that. And not just in the United States, but you have brothers and sisters right across the border that I hope you are still communicating with, um, in Korea. Um, so how it's all started, and I'll be brief, but it shows you how, and if you've heard this story before, then you're going to hear it again because I'm getting older. So how all this started was in 1990, October 4th, 1990, while reporting in Rochester, New York. um, I didn't feel well. I didn't feel well during a live shot we were doing. And ironically, I'd covered the death of a diver in a plant who got sucked into Lake Ontario. So I'm doing this live shot and I can barely get through it. And I mentioned to my photographer after we were done, I was like, I'm not feeling well. My heart feels funny. Um, Eventually, they took me. What they did in the newsroom when we got back is they called all the hospitals and kind of found a triage in which hospital was least busiest. And then I went to Highland Hospital and they did some tests and hooked me up to an EKG and determined the next day that I had had a mild heart attack, if there is such a thing as a mild heart attack. Long story short, fast forward about maybe a month later, I'm going to my new cardiologist office. I'm sitting in her office and I see this magazine. It was a Smithsonian. I picked it up and I start flipping through it and I see this article by a gentleman and was all about the Black Seminole. It's something that's actually featured in the documentary when what's her name? I'm from L.A. Billy Frierson. Billie Jean Frierson, when she holds up the magazine and talks about Black Seminole, that's the article I read. So anyway, I'm in the doctor's office and I being an honest person, I said, look, to the receptionist there, I said, I'd like to take this. I mean, I could steal it, but I wasn't giving that magazine up once I read it because, thinking I'm a know-it-all and I know all this African American history, and I had never heard of these people. I'm like, who are they and what's going on? And then from there, I just started doing research and got in touch with people in Kenny County. And somehow somebody eventually gave me the name of then Cynthia Ventura, who's now Cynthia Chico in Wewoka. Somehow I got in touch with her and we went to Wewoka with a crew, met her, interviewed her. And then she started telling me about Seminole days, about Dub Warrior, introduced me to Dub, and that's kind of how everything started. But if it wasn't for a heart attack, then I wouldn't have known about the Black Seminole and wouldn't have done the documentary, which is kind of crazy, but it just shows you how the Lord works. You got questions? I can't hear you.
Oh, does anyone have a question? Well, I do. How many times did you come to Brackett while filming the documentary? Because it was so interesting to see sort of different phases.
Um, I came to Bracket twice. I think I
Really?
came twice.
Okay.
I don't know if it was a third time. It was interesting seeing though, because it was a period of time, and you know how I judge things on Steve Warrior's daughters.
Oh,
Because the
by them
first time I
growing.
was there, they were like little girls, right?
Yes.
I interviewed Steve Warrior, and then you see them again, and it's like, oh my God,
And they're so tall.
they're tall and they're grown, and then yeah. Um, but yeah, and it's interesting. Speaking of Steve, having the opportunity to meet him, and Dub was still alive, thank God. I just
Yeah.
um, Miss Charles Wilson. She
Okay.
had, yeah, so I didn't. I was never had the opportunity of meeting her, but I did get opportunity to meet Dub and Ethel and talk to all of them. People who aren't with us anymore. So
Yeah.
as much as I regretted missing people, I'm certainly glad I got down there to
To meet the ones that you
meet
did.
some people. Yeah.
Yeah. And something really beautiful that happened last year. Um, we found out a lady who had helped take care of Mr. Warrior and Mrs. Warrior. It was Marcia Butler. She is a Black Seminole as well.
Okay.
She found out that Steve Warrior was going to be coming to Seminole Days last year, and Mr. Warrior had left something that he wanted him to be given. So Marcia presented him with this beautiful belt buckle that Mr. Warrior had put aside for him. So
Oh,
this
great.
is 3 years after his
Yeah.
passing. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was absolute, just Mr. Warrior. Of course he would do that, and
Yeah.
have people to make sure that they follow through with his instructions.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was absolutely beautiful, beautiful ceremony.
And speaking of Steve Warrior, I hope that one of the things the documentary does is inspire, especially younger people, to look into the history of their people. Because as amazing as the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts were, all their accomplishments, and I'm preaching to the choir here,
Mhm.
there are people who are Black Seminole after the Indian Wars, who fought in the military,
Mhm.
who won elective office, who were teachers, who were lawyers. The first Black Texas Ranger, Lee Young,
Mhm.
the man considered probably the best cowboy in West Texas, at least in the Big Bend, Blaze Payne.
Yeah.
I mean, it just goes on. And then look at Steve Warrior, who played basketball at the Air Force Academy
Mhm.
and is still a pilot.
Yeah,
And he's a Black Seminole from Arizona, one of your cousins from Arizona.
exactly.
Um, so my point is that Black Seminole are still doing amazing, amazing things. And so focus, of course, and be proud of the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, but also remember that you have all sorts of people that are still doing amazing things.
Yeah, that's very true.
including Red Fox.
Red Fox. Oh wow.
Yeah, his grandmother was a full blood out of Oklahoma.
Oh
I knew
wow.
he was from Oklahoma. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's
So
the town
yeah,
in Oklahoma? It's an all Black town.
you got to narrow it down. You got several.
Well, yeah, but okay. He's from one of the all Black towns in Oklahoma. Yeah. Art Burton would know this because Art Burton
Oh
knows
yeah.
everything about Oklahoma.
Yeah, but you're right, because we wouldn't have our Seminole Days celebration if it weren't for our more recent
Right. Right.
ancestors, especially Miss Charles and her sister, of course, Mr. Warrior and Mrs. Warrior. So that's something like in our museum that we were very intentional about doing. The history books all stop at 1914 and make our story seem so tragic, but
Right.
our story
Right.
continues from there. And
Well,
that just shows the resilience.
you all survived, like all of us, but you all really had that great example of your ancestors to keep on pushing.
Mhm.
Don't let racism and don't let the threat of violence and don't let any of that stop you. And it never has.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to mention, and I don't know if Mr. McCrae's around or not, he and I talk about this a lot. I'm gonna say something that probably people don't want to hear, but I'm sorry.
Mhm.
I've reached a certain age where I don't care anymore. But one of the things that sticks in my craw, and I don't know why, but the dropping of the word Negro
Mhm.
is, to me, very frustrating because and I'll tell you why it's frustrating. When you drop the word Negro from whatever title you're putting on your people, from the
Mhm.
cemetery to the canyon, whatever,
Yeah.
what you're doing is you're feeding right into the racism that was perpetuated that didn't want to talk about your ancestors and their accomplishments.
Mhm.
When you drop that, people don't know that they're Black.
Exactly.
They think that they're 100% pure Indian, which they were not.
Yeah.
You
You
look
know,
at all your skin colors, we're still Black folk.
exactly.
Okay. And
Yeah.
to deny that is to feed into the racism because what happened, and a lot of this was this lost cause garbage
Mhm.
we kind of talked about off camera earlier. There's always been a myth coming from white major society about Black people that Black men were stupid, afraid of ghosts, wouldn't fight, all of that garbage. And what happens is the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts turn all of that upside down.
Yeah.
All of those lies, all those stereotypes. You just look at the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, who were the boldest, bravest men who ever stepped in on this face of this earth. That refutes all that racism.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, historically, and Mr. McCrae will back me up because, you know, we're historians of a sort. You can't like twist history around to fit what you want to say in 2024. Those men were called, and the reason that they fought, and by the way, the word Negro at that time was the best thing they were calling us.
Yeah. Yeah.
You may feel like, oh, I don't want to be called a Negro now in 2024. I get that. We're Black people, we're people of color, whatever we else, African Americans, okay. But
Mhm.
back then, that was the most honorable phrase that they put on us was the word Negro. So to like feel ashamed of it or say, oh, we're not going to use the word Negro anymore, my personal opinion, and I'm sorry if I'm offending people, it's a travesty to their memory because what they are remembered in historically are the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts.
Yeah.
Black
completely
men, Black
agree.
Indians. And
Yeah.
when you drop that Negro, you drop everything Black about them. So then what happened with the lost cause garbage, if you look at what was written in the turn of the 20th century, in the 20s and 30s, and I mentioned this, I don't know if anybody noticed it in the documentary, I have a photo of white West Texas historians at Texas Tech, people that are honored for being these great Texas historians. Guess what? They would never say that the Scouts were Black men. They did that on purpose because they did not want to honor and give credibility to those Black men. So they just said, oh, they were Seminoles.
Mhm.
There are a couple of books there's one book that I'm not going to mention the author's name because I liked him later. I didn't like him then. But there's a gentleman who has a book about Quanah Parker and the Comanche. And he talks all about the development of the Comanche, who Quanah Parker was, blah, blah, blah. And then they talk about the fact that they were forced onto the reservation. This is a 200 some page book. Not once does he mention the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. How can you write a book about Quanah Parker and especially the Comanche being defeated in Palo Duro Canyon and not mention the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts? But anyway, all of this, and I don't want to talk too long about it, but when they omit the name, that's a racist lie. And so once again, when you're omitting the name Negro from Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, you're buying right into the racist lie. That's all I got to say about it.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like growing up in Brackett, we always knew that we are Black Seminole, but using the term Seminole became just a shorthand because it was just us, you know. We're all from Brackett, so we speak Seminole. We are Seminole. But people would know, oh, if you're saying you're Seminole, that means you are a Black Seminole. And I think we are so sort of insulated here that we never thought past, oh, the name of the cemetery is Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery. We know who's buried there, never thinking that anybody else would wonder outside of that. So
Right.
that is something that we are confronting more and more as, the internet has kind of made people crazy.
Right.
So,
Right.
so we do sort of deal with people like, oh, are they Black? Where's the Black if they're. So yeah, that is something that we thought, stayed among us, but now there is, like we got some explaining to do.
Well, once again, and I don't, like I said, I know there was nothing nefarious about it.
Yeah.
But for all the people that didn't come from Texas, for all the people that don't know the history, for all the people that, don't know about Seminole days and don't come to Brackett, the perception, even with Seminole Canyon right there by you,
Yeah. Yeah.
perception is that these are Native Americans.
Yep.
And then
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but you throw in the racism from the Seminoles, and it all feeds into everything because they
That's
don't
very
want to
true.
recognize y'all anyway.
Yes, we know that for sure. So,
Well, on
yeah.
that, we have to make a distinction, and I've done this several times up here in the Northeast. We have to make the distinction between what happens in Oklahoma and what happens in Florida. Not that there aren't issues in Florida, but they're not as virulent, from what I understand from people that are still living in the communities in Florida, especially reservation communities. I mean, you didn't have any attempts of throwing any Black members out of the Seminole tribe of Florida. And in fact, there've been outreach between the Seminole tribe of Florida and the Bahamas several times. So again, we have to make the distinctions. And I hear what you're saying, Mr. Hill, but there's some complications to that argument too. I'm not
Yeah.
disagreeing with you, but again, looking at the bigger picture, there are other nuances we have to be aware of.
Yeah, I agree. There are always nuances. But as I told my daughter years ago, everything is political. Mr. McRae, I see you. I don't hear you.
Hello?
Hey, how you doing?
Doing pretty good.
You got anything to say about what we've been talking about?
No, I'd rather not at this time.
Okay. All right. I ain't gonna call you off then.
I just want to state that the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, that was the official term given to that group by the U.S. Army. And that was the official name that was given to them. I think people should keep that in mind also.
Yeah.
Because the Buffalo Soldiers are altogether different. I haven't been able to find any official document, a military document with the name Buffalo Soldier on it.
Oh, we've talked about that ad nauseum because I think Lecky made it all up. But
Yeah.
that's a whole nother subject.
Yeah.
Here's the thing though, and I do think if you look at the term Buffalo Soldiers, which I find abhorrent, but if you look at the term to mean African Americans in the military in the Indian Wars, then the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts were Buffalo Soldiers also. And in fact, you'll notice from the documentary, there were certain times, especially when they were chasing Victorio in New Mexico in particular, where they were the scouts for the 9th and 10th Cavalries. So there were times that they actually fought in the same places.
Yeah.
And fought against the same enemies.
And actually, thanks to Mr. Benny, he helped us. Well, didn't even help us. He told us about our on my grandfather's side, my paternal grandfather, our maternal grandfather, about a gentleman who was a Buffalo soldier. So there were Buffalo soldiers who were coming in and marrying Black Seminoles. And we wouldn't have had that information without his research. So, people do try to separate the Black Seminoles and the Buffalo Soldiers, but there were so many times when they intersected. I mean, they literally had to,
Right.
But yeah, I think it is important to show the distinctions, but also to show also how they sort of worked in concert together to, just survive and get their work done.
And the scouts were, I mean, that word scouts, they were tremendous scouts. The ones who were tracking, there weren't any trackers like them, except some Native Americans. I mean, they could track. If you recall the story from within the documentary about, one of the trackers came days behind these people and could tell you every single thing about them because he could read the tracks. So yeah, my point is that they scouted for all sorts of other military units, including once again the 9th and 10th Cavalry.
Yeah.
The interesting thing too, I find is within the documentary, and there's a lot of stuff in the documentary. You could actually see it a few times
and pick out.
But the thing about those John Wayne films, those John Wayne, John Ford movies, specifically where you should have seen Black people, you didn't see them You know, when you talk about the raid on Remolino, that was the movie Rio Grande.
Yeah.
You don't see any, you don't see any black folk in it. Well, if you know what Remolino was, you know the scouts were a pivotal part of the raid and the scouting.
I've never had an opportunity to watch this, but I did look up on IMDb a while ago that there was I think 1979. I don't know if it was supposed to be a series, but it was just one episode of the Black Seminoles. Let me see if I can find it again. But there was only ever one episode made. Have you ever heard of that?
No. And you saw it?
It was on IMDb. This was a couple years ago.
Were the actors, were they all African Americans who played the scouts, or?
Let me see.
And while Wendy's doing that, there's the fictionalized movie Buffalo Soldier starring Danny Glover. Definitely fiction because Carl Lumley played John Horse in that. And Ancestor Horse was much too old that time to be taking part in what that dramatization was supposed to be all about.
Right.
Plus, in reality, Vittorio fought his way out of Rattlesnake Springs.
Sure
The Buffalo Soldiers didn't let him go. And Wendy and I had a discussion a few weeks ago about this. We're not saying that there weren't instances where our ancestors, as the military, then turned their backs and let the full-bloods get away with stuff. But in that particular instance, no, that was his pure fiction. It was a good action thing, but you can't rely on that as being pure history. And I think Carl Lumley played John Horse in that.
Yeah, I remember it. One other thing, speaking of the boldness and the accomplishments of the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, if I'm gonna put this in, because y'all are down in Texas, most of y'all anyway, are in Texas, and it's football season. You always judge, I'm a big sports guy, you always really judge a team by the teams that they beat, the teams that they played. You can be a mediocre team and crush some chumps and run up the score. But when you play against good teams and you beat them, that says how amazing you are. Now I'm coming back to the Scouts, and we mentioned this somewhat in the documentary, but I don't think, because when I was a little kid, I was like a fanatic about cowboys and Indians and knew about 200 tribes and where they were located and all of this stuff. When you look at the tribes that the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts had to fight against, what are we talking about? Kiowa, Apache, Southern Cheyenne, Comanche, Mexican Kickapoo. Think about this. The U.S. military, those helicopter gunships, what do they call them? Apache, Kiowa, Comanche.
Cayuse.
Yeah.
But these were some of the most fierce warriors in the West. These were the people that the Scouts fought against. That says a lot about them. That says a lot about their fighting prowess.
Yeah, it does. And that's true. Yeah, that they were.
Like I said, look at the military and what they call a helicopter gunship.
Exactly.
And those were the tribes that the Scouts fought against and defeated in most instances.
Yeah. Wow.
One more thing that I'd like to bring up, and I don't know if anybody's looking at this. Briefly, I had the linguistics professor, the gentleman from England.
Dr. Ian Hancock.
Hancock, yeah. And I wish in hindsight I'd spent more time with him and delved more into it. But, and Miss, I got this from Lee Young. He talked about it somewhat, and so did Mary Lou Johnson. The language.
Yeah.
The same thing that, when I say the same thing that the majority culture did to other Native American tribes, they did to the Black Seminole. What did they do? They took the children, they separated them from the elders, and what did they do? They punished them for speaking their language.
Oh, yeah.
Whenever you want to control the people, Whenever you want to take a people's identity away from them, you take their language.
Mhm.
I'm saying all that to say, I would love someday, and maybe somebody's already doing it, maybe get Ian Hancock back down to Brackettville. But wouldn't it be wonderful if young people could learn
Yeah.
Seminole?
We actually are already doing it.
Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
that would be
Yeah, and
awesome to have some kind of something
yeah,
going on to try to bring the language back as
yeah,
best as you can.
yeah, we are, Dr. Ian has been amazing. This was right before COVID. So, his plan, his dream has always been to have a boot camp because it is very difficult to learn any language without full submersion.
Right.
So he would love to have a boot camp in Brackett. We received a small grant for $2,500, and that was enough to, okay, we have some money, let's start this, whether we're ready or not, let's do this. So in June of, was it 2020 or 2021, we had our first ASC lesson with Dr. Ian coming to Brackettville. He made akara for us, which is this amazing black-eyed pea hush puppy kind of thing, and had our first lesson. And then from there, we went remote. So we had that first lesson plus 11 more. So he gave us a year of ASC lessons. So that was into, the new year. And then he didn't come for June, but came back in September, and we had another lesson. So the plan is to start up again because there is more interest. So yeah, we are doing our best to revitalize the language.
Because that's such
Wendy
a
at the, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Wendy, at the risk of preaching to the converted again, I don't know what funding sources you've looked at, but I've both been in the arts most of my adult life, both as a performer and administrator. And what you're talking about falls under the purview of the National Endowment for the Humanities, language preservation. So you should, look into that. Which doesn't say you're going to get the money immediately, but at least you can at least start the ball rolling, because at some point you will get it. And like I tell other folks, hey, somebody's got to get it. It might as well be us.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things, Wendy, you've heard me talk about this is, please, if there's anybody out there who's a grant writer or knows a grant writer, the things you all could do if you had grant writers, because you got a historical Disneyland right there in Brackettville. Seriously.
Yeah.
I'm talking about historical tourism, cultural.
Yes.
Can you
Yeah.
imagine all the people, especially people of color, who would want to
That
come
would
to
come. Yeah.
Brackettville and find out about the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts and the ancestry, and then the connection to Mexico and the connection to the Bahamas?
Yeah. Yeah.
When I started out saying I was jealous of y'all, you all are just rich. You got like discovering oil, only it's history. Y'all got history down there that I don't think people understand. Once again, grant writers.
Yeah, I am listening. Yeah, we definitely.
You all could, like I said, you could have a historical gold mine right there in Brackett.
Yeah.
And most of us are all cousins anyway. So
I know. Yeah, we do need to tap into those sources because they are out there.
When I did talk to Dr. Hancock, and I know he's talked to you all about that, that whole Gullah Geechee language connection from the Sea Islands to Georgia, where your folks originated, Georgia going into Florida, all of that's connected with West Africa as far as some of the words.
Yeah, it's within the language.
Y'all know more, but I mean that whole connection. So the connection is so rich to Africa, Southeast United States, to Mexico.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so that's where we understand that we can't let, and to be honest with you, I think so we started in 2021 because we lost Mr. and Mrs. Warrior in 2020. And I think that's what really scared me, along with several other people, was we're watching our libraries burning down, and we are losing people who are so valuable,
And here's one thing I would suggest. maybe it's too late and maybe you're already doing this. So
Mhm.
forgive
Oh no, you're fine.
the guy who's not a Black Seminole from up north trying to tell y'all what to do. But have you ever thought of interviewing, and I would assign young people to do this, having them interview their aunts, their uncles, their grandparents, and have a repository of those recordings,
Mhm.
some kind of library
Yeah.
down there in Brackettville where you have those stories because, you know, I just lost a wonderful childhood friend 2 weeks ago. Everybody's
I'm sorry
getting
to hear
older,
that. Yeah.
not going to be around. We don't know. We all got an expiration date. We just don't know when.
Exactly.
So my point is, especially get the young people involved to interview their aunts, uncles, grandparents, and from the folks in Arizona, all of it.
Mhm.
You got a diaspora unto yourselves.
We
Not
do.
just
Yeah,
a
within
Black
bracket.
diaspora. You got a Black Seminole diaspora that goes into northern Mexico and
Yeah.
once again the Bahamas and everywhere else.
Mhm.
Take advantage of that, but get the young people because it costs nothing to have a digital camera these days. You
No,
can almost do it on your phone.
it's on your phone. Yeah.
But I'm saying do it in an organized manner where and create a library where you have such and such interviewed such and such on this date.
Mhm.
But not just the interviews, have that as a library so people in the next generations can come back and learn and because those stories, I mean, y'all got stories. Those stories are wealth. Those are gold.
Yeah. And especially if they're being repeated by fourth and fifth generation, you
You know,
know?
Lee Young, and I don't know how many other people you still got there, but take advantage of those folks.
We actually have a young man, and Wendy knows him as well, Gabriel Greaves,
Oh
who's doing
yeah.
exactly what you're saying. Uh, Deep respect for this young brother. He's guarding our history. He's done everything from traveling into the Bahamas. He even found our diaspora up into Nova Scotia and has
Yes.
documented that.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Just by luck, I happened to have met Gabriel some years back, and we become close friends. And it turns out he's my cousin too. But when he calls, I drop everything and we talk.
Yeah. He's
Because the young man's
amazing.
integrity and just the
Yeah.
depth of his research is something I deeply respect. So some of our young people are running with this.
That's
Yeah.
great.
There can always more to be done, but yeah, some of our youngins are definitely running with this.
And it's interesting you mentioned Nova Scotia because there's a whole really strong history of Afro Canadians out of Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
Those were the brothers that went out on the boats and saved people when they were shipwrecked also
Wow.
in Nova Scotia. They were also the whalers. Amazing history. And how many of them are connected to you all? Think about that.
It's said that during the 1800s, and I'm going to digress a little, but I think it's relevant. In some parts of the world, people were thinking that the United States was basically a country of color because most of the whalers and a lot of the shipmen were Black and indigenous. They had white captains and officers, but most of the crews were all Black and red. So that created a certain imprint in different parts of the world. And that's been documented in several books, which I don't have at my immediate within grabbing range right now, but it has been documented.
Well, it's interesting because back to the documentary I'm working on now, and I think off camera, I mentioned that there were close to 200,000
Mhm.
Black men who fought for their own freedom during the Civil War that most people don't know a thing about. About 187,000 in the Army, but another close to 200,000, 20,000 rather, in the Navy. Well, quite a few of those men in the Navy were whalers from New England and from Nova Scotia. And one of them actually came from Cape Verde Islands off the coast of Africa. His name was Joaquin Pease, and he's a Medal of Honor recipient for a Civil War battle, sea battle, fought off the coast of France. But he was the gunner, and he was awarded a Medal of Honor, and he just disappeared. He never even got his award. It's in a museum in Washington, D.C., because nobody could find him. But long story short, a lot of those sailors were whalers, and they were already used to the sea, and they adapted right away from becoming whalers to becoming military sailors. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
amazing. No, I mean, I just was thinking, you just follow one person's life and where will you go? It's
Like
just
I said, the
amazing.
brothers from Cape Verde, how did
Yeah,
they go from Cape Verde off the coast of Africa to New England to then volunteering
to
for
go
the
fight
Union
off the
Navy
coast of France,
to fight off
just
the coast of
what an
France?
amazing life,
Yeah, because a
you
lot of Cape
know?
Verdeans, when they made that migration back then, or ended up here, rather, let me put it that way, because it wasn't
Especially
always
Rhode
voluntary.
Island, a lot of them in New England.
Yeah, definitely in southern Massachusetts, and you still have that pocket up there.
Right.
Mhm.
And you know who's a Cape Verdean? The great Horace Silver.
Oh yeah,
Oh, really?
all the musicians.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
you
look
preach
at
to
Horace
his
Silver.
there, man.
You see how his hair would fall in his eyes. He's a Cape Verdean.
Oh, I
Yeah.
did not know that. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I think of Cape Verde, I think of Cesario Evora, who's like
Oh goodness,
Billie
yes.
Holiday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they had the Portuguese, the African, the
Yeah.
Portuguese, all of it mixed. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I will listen to Horace Silver with new ears now. That's amazing.
And Mr. Hill, I brought this up in a prior forum, but speculation on my part, going back to the Amistad. Now, I'm based out in Queens, although I'm originally from Florida. I'm in Queens now, and to say the least, I'm quite active in the indigenous community up here. But I've speculated and stated that if the Amistad actually would have made landfall, the ship would have been found, but not the escaping Africans, because the indigenous people of Long Island were taking in Africans at the time. So just something to
Yeah.
think about right there.
Yeah.
And we can still see that legacy today in many of the indigenous people that are in Long Island.
I went to a big not that I smoke it, I went as a business person, but I went to last year, I went to in Long Island, they have a big cannabis
On the
exposition.
Shinnecock Reservation.
And the Shinnecock, I didn't realize how many black people they brought these people out. They said these are Native Americans from Long Island, and they were black folks. I'm looking at them like, what? Yeah.
Yeah, that was probably Shanae and Lance and who else? Sunshine. Yeah, I know them all.
Yeah.
They're friends of mine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, beautiful women. I was like, oh, these are my
And they're fierce.
sisters.
Most of them hunt too. I mean, they're serious hunters. I mean, deer season, turkey season, them sisters get gunned. You don't want to piss them off. Let me tell you right now, man.
Yeah, that's funny.
That's why I stay on the good side.
The Shinnecock. Yeah.
And not only them, the Puspatuck a little bit down the road from them, they're state recognized. But then you have other nations out here that aren't recognized at all, but have kept their communities together, like the Setalcocks, the Montauk proper. I have many friends out of Mettenacock. We still have there's a picture of me from and a Canarsie sister, and they're not recognized, but they're still Canarsie people. But there was an exhibit back in the late 90s called African Native Americans. We're still here. We're both in our regalia, but our sister, who's known as Paw Paw in the community, beautiful Canarsie sister. So yeah, but Afro Canarsie.
Yeah. Getting back to Mexico, you know that what I find fascinating is that your brothers and sisters in Coahuila, Piedras Negras and Nacimiento,
Mhm.
celebrate Juneteenth so hard.
Yes.
I mean, they
Yeah.
celebrated. I don't know if you know that, Mr. Harrington. They celebrate Juneteenth so hard in Mexico. They are serious about their Juneteenth.
They are. It's like Christmas, it's amazing. And now, well, the interesting thing is it's been about 10 years now. I think back in 2014, during an election or during, their census, when they took their census, they asked everyone who was of African descent to identify themselves, because for the longest time, Mexico just said, we'll acknowledge you, but not nationally.
Right.
And during that census, they said, okay, well, who are you? And there were 2 million people who identified as Afro, Mexicano, of African descent.
Yeah.
I think that changed a lot and instilled a lot of pride to finally be seen. And so I think Juneteenth has grown a lot since then, because the government has really taken an interest in the lives of these people who identify as Black now. So they're putting money towards people becoming anthropologists and historians. They have the yearly encuentro, where everybody goes to one town that's, a Black town, and celebrates that town. So I think Juneteenth was already a big deal, but it's become even bigger now that it feels like it's okay to celebrate your Blackness. So yeah, it's been really interesting to see.
Well, and that leads to me to something that we said